OK，感谢大家能够参加今天的解读 What Did Wise 3000英语的讲座啊。我们在这里呢介绍一下三位今天的重量级的 speaker 啊。第一位呢是我们的 Matt Thompson，Matt Thompson 是咱们 Linky 的 debate 的以及其他 communication 课程的主教练啊。同时呢，他也是咱们标化考试 SCT、SAT 的负责人。啊。那也是咱们为1年级的孩子打基础非常受欢迎的老师。那第二位呢是咱们的 Dr. Hamanda，Dr. Hamanda 呢也是是学院派的代表哈。为什么是 Dr. Hamanda？因为 Hamanda 老师呢是在大学教授英文方面的专业的课程啊。那来到 Linky 呢也是进行7年级到12年级 Grade 7 to Grade 12的 Writing Enrichment 的 course。那第三位呢是我们的 Teresa 老师啊，Teresa 老师呢也是针对于9年级到12年级的英文的这个 literature 的部分是非常有建树的老师啊。那么今天呢，我们就把话筒交给我们的 Matt Thompson 啊，由他来主持今天的 seminar。那 Hello Matt，it's for you。
Thank you very much, Shen. Yes, as Shen just pointed out, my name is Matthew Thompson. Many of you may know me. I've been teaching at Linky for a little over 5 years now. This semester, I am teaching the creative writing stream of English, and I don't have a lot to do with this implementation. So I'm just hosting tonight. Shen and I are going to be hosting tonight, and we're going to be listening to Hamada and Teresa, who are going to be taking you through tonight's presentation. Tonight, we are planning to highlight the launch of a new product here at Linky, which is the Wordly Wise 3000 curriculum. We're very excited to bring this to you. This is a tremendous teaching tool. We've been playing with it for the entirety of the Christmas break. We've come up with loads of interesting ideas for what we can do. It seems to solve a lot of problems that we've been wrestling with. It's going to make our lives easier. Hopefully, it's going to make your lives easier. And our idea is that it's going to make our classes more effective and hopefully more enjoyable. I will be running the slideshow tonight, so if anything goes wrong technically, it will be entirely my fault. Please direct all complaint emails to info@linkedkey, where Shen will handle them for us. All right, we're going to get started here. Hamada is going to begin by explaining the vital significance of learning and mastering vocabulary for academic success. He's going to be talking about how vocabulary will affect you both within English class, but really in every class that you take within the English language. And then we'll move to Teresa, who's going to get a little bit more technical here. I'm really excited for this presentation because we're really getting into the details of what's going to make this new tool helpful, what it should mean to you, what we hope it will mean to us. And Teresa is going to take us through a lot of the more technical details. So we'll get started with Hamada.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Appreciate it. And thanks, Sharon, for the introduction as well. I'd like to take a moment just to welcome our guests and the students to Spring 2024. Thank you so much for being with us this evening. We're really excited about this new addition, new component in our English program in the English department at Linky, which is the Wordly Wise 3000. It's a very exciting series dealing with direct academic vocabulary instruction. From my personal experience as an assistant professor of English, literature, and academic writing, I can say something. Vocabulary as a linguistic component has not been done justice at schools. In a variety of, let me say, of countries and curricula all over the world. Vocabulary happens to be one underrated component which needs to be highlighted. It needs to be, let me say, strengthened and paid attention to significantly in order to improve the productivity of students, their grades, and prepare them for the future as well. So in my first part in this presentation, I'm going to highlight the vital significance of learning and mastering vocabulary for academic success. And I'd like to start with two interesting quotations on vocabulary from two internationally renowned figures, somebody called Zig Ziglar, as well as Rodolphe Flesch and Abraham Lass. Those quotations will resonate within the rest of the presentation itself. Zigzag, who was a very established salesperson who went on to become a very established author and motivational speaker, said the following: your understanding of what you read and hear is, to a very large degree, determined by your vocabulary. So improve your vocabulary daily. And the other quotation goes, you cannot build up a vocabulary if you never meet any new words. And to meet them, you must read. The more you read, the better. So you can see how significant and mutually beneficial reading and vocabulary are. Next slide, please, Matthew. So what is vocabulary, and what happens if students do not have sufficient vocabulary in the academic process? Vocabulary is defined by a linguist named Stahl as knowledge, an understanding of how a word fits into the world. Vocabulary word knowledge can be understood through listening and reading. For example, if we just take a second to read those two sentences there, if you say, my uncle was late, and this is a picture of my late uncle, right? We can see the word late, which can be classified as an adjective used in two different, let me say, places there. We're talking about vocabulary in context here. The first use in the first sentence, my uncle was late, indicates something to do with time, right? So my uncle was not early. But if you see the second one, the word late is coming as an adjective modifying the noun uncle. It doesn't mean that my uncle was late, right? It means my uncle is dead. So this is a picture of my dead uncle. So this is one aspect of why we are focusing on vocabulary. We would like just to highlight the significance of how vocabulary changes in terms of context, how we have nuances to meanings, how it is very significant for students to know those nuances and to master them. So students will not succeed in understanding any texts if they do not know the meaning of the words they are coming across. For many, the shortage of vocabulary knowledge can be a reason, can be the reason why students are not able to understand the overall meaning of a text. Next slide, please. How demanding is it to learn vocabulary? I'd like just to share an idea with you about how demanding and daunting it is to learn vocabulary in the English language. Bring in some statistical figures here from some established linguists. Learning the vocabulary of any language is a challenging task. The task is even more challenging for English language learners, given the sheer size of the English vocabulary. English has the largest vocabulary of any other languages, depending on how words are defined. Its estimated size ranges from 500,000 words to over 1 million words. So you can imagine the sheer magnitude of the English vocabulary. Are we meant to memorize a lot of words like this, like hundreds of thousands? Not really. There is something called languages across the disciplines, right? There are numbers showing how many words, let me say, a young student acquires every year until there is something like direct instruction coming from high school and university. So if you can just proceed to share those numbers, Matt. Thank you. It's very important to learn vocabulary because the knowledge of words and word meanings is crucial for the academic success of students. The average student begins first grade with approximately 6,000 words of spoken language. And then students continue to learn roughly 3,000 words, more words each year. And subsequently, starting from the beginning of high school, there are some words that require more teaching than others. So you can see how the instruction dealing with vocabulary can become more specific, more tailored, depending on what students choose and what they want to specialize in at university. So learning to read is a continuum that peaks with high school teachers and university professors who teach students how to analyze and read critically in their respective fields. For example, if you want to specialize to major in engineering, you'll find something called the technical jargon of engineering, which means the technical language containing specific methods adopted in the study of engineering, such as the SPSE. Any engineering student would know that we have something called situation, problem, solutions, and evaluation. This is the basic universal formula adopted in the study of engineering. Likewise, we have something called the journalistic approach, which is the universal formula adopted in the study of journalism, which is the WH questions. There is no journalistic piece that is considered or deemed complete without enough attention paid to the individual WH questions, like who, when, what, where, what, why. So that's something we call language across the discipline. It is something that can be, let me say, taught in every respective major, and the students are expected just to, let me say, to master that jargon in order to, let me say, to go far and beyond in their respective fields. Next slide, please. Right. What do you know when you know a word? I've got some interesting quotation here highlighting the significances of how the meaning of a specific word differs depending on its position, the place it takes within a sentence, for example, and the nuances of that, let me say, of the meaning itself. Human communication above and beyond the words that we use is so nuanced. It makes it difficult to not only analyze the vocabulary you use, but the intention behind it. And this is a quotation coming from Grant Imahara. This is an example showing the nuances of, let me say, meaning for one specific adjective, which is critical. So I'm going to read those examples, and I'd like you to pay attention to the use of the word critical in these three sentences. The report was critical of the employees involved in the project. The driver of the overturned lorry was in a critical condition in hospital last night. He shared critical information with his manager. So I'd like you to take something like 10 to 15 seconds, just looking at the word critical here, and just think of its meaning depending on context. You will realize that the first one is, the three words here do not mean the same thing. In the first sentence, the word critical means, it gives something like a bad or negative connotation, which means that the report was criticizing, was holding the employees responsible for a mistake in the project itself. Critical means, providing some negative criticism there. The second one, the driver was in a critical condition. Critical is something like a serious or life-threatening condition. In the third sentence, the word critical means very important information, right? Information that, for example, if you are talking about a company, it can be, if that information is obtained by another company, it can, result in some, adverse consequences for the company itself. It's not like classified information, but very important information. So you can see the differences in meaning here. This is something that can only be highlighted through instruction, through reading, and because reading is a cumulative process, right? So that's a very good example to see words in context there. Just to conclude this part, from my experience, from our experience as English educators at Linky, we have seen that our modern multicultural and increasingly AI-controlled world does not need more geniuses. What the world needs nowadays is effective communicators. And this has been our rationale, our purpose at Linky. We would like our students to become effective communicators, finishing our programs with a strong skill sets, comprising outstanding abilities in reading, listening, writing, and speaking. we've always tried to bridge the gaps and to provide our students with skills that can take them a long way at school, that can improve their grades as well. And we are really excited about this new addition here at Linky, which is the arrival of Wordly Wise 3000, because it is all about vocabulary, and this is actually our key to success. This is only possible, by the way, through the constant learning and mastery of vocabulary within academic and professional fields. So no matter what field you want to specialize in, any major, and no matter what, let me say, job or profession you want to embark on in the future, the key is to become an effective communicator and an active team player. Can I have the next slide, please? One thing I'd like just to share with you concerning what you need to know when you know a word, when you learn a new word. Sometimes we think like, maybe I need to know how to pronounce it or how to spell it, and what dictionary definition it is. Is that enough? Not really. There are other words we need just to pay attention to, such as the figurative meaning of that word, for example. So the meanings, if you think of a word like, for example, sleep, right? Or eternal sleep as a phrase there. Eternal sleep is something that gives this metaphorical sense. If you talk about eternal sleep, you are talking about death, for example, right? Sometimes we need to know something about the word itself, which we have etymology, which means the word origin. Like, for example, you think of a word like this word is coming from, let me say, Latin, or coming from French. This word is directly acquired from Italian, right? So there is something called etymology, which is something really important to know when when learning a new word. We have also to know the phonemic alphabet, the transcription we can find in the dictionary. Sometimes we come across a new word, we don't know how to pronounce it, so a dictionary can help us. There is always this phonemic transcription that can help us pronounce the word itself. So we need to be familiar with those things, and Wordly Wise presents that with every single word we learn. Sometimes we have to go through example sentences, sample sentences, exemplifying those words we're learning. Putting those words in context are extremely important. So we're not meant to learn words by heart, exactly as the dictionary presents them, as individual words. We have to learn them in context. And our new series, Wordly Wise, also covers that beautifully. Something I always tell my students about is the significance of collocations. Whenever they write a paragraph for me or an essay, I always invite them to do something that possibly schools do not ask students to do, which is while they're planning their essays or paragraphs, I ask them just to sit down and think of collocations. Collocations are words beyond the synonyms and antonyms. Synonyms are words that mean the same, antonyms are the opposite. Collocations are words that, let me say, that are associated, that float within the same topic. If you think of hospital, you should think of a doctor, surgery, surgeon, patients, ER. Those are collocations. They're very important, and they add a lot to your writing, to your speech. So collocations is a significant part of vocabulary. And this is something we need to pay attention to as well. Sometimes we need to know the words that a specific word is confused with, right? And we need to know the connotations, the emotional feelings a certain word evokes, for example. And we need to know the differences in the word between different dialects of English. Like, for example, the dialect spoken in Ontario is different from dialects spoken in British Columbia. So are there any differences concerning specific word? Does that come with a difference in meaning? These are very important things to know. All right. The other slide, please. Next one. I think this is the last one. Oh, okay. One more slide. Something else we can just focus on beyond the knowledge of synonyms and word classifications. There is something called word family. Like, sometimes we need to know the root of the word itself. If you see those examples, like ease or easy or easily, easiness. Sometimes it's very beneficial to trace the word family or the root of the word itself in order to understand it. I just spoke about synonyms, antonyms, and there is something called homonyms. Homonyms are words that are spelled the same way and sound the same, but have different meanings, such as lean. We use the word lean to describe a person who's skinny. We use the word lean also to describe meat with no fat, and we use the word lean to say that somebody is up against a wall, for example. So you can see the differences in meaning. The only way to differentiate among those three words would be just to use them in context, right? Another thing we need to know when we learn a new word is something called hyponyms. Those are technical terms within linguistics. So hyponyms are words that all fit in the same meaning category. Like, for example, you say rose, daisy, lily, carnation. You are talking about types of flowers, right? And the last word organization we need to pay attention to is the lexical field. Like, words in the same lexical field are all used in the same context, a situation or field, such as, like, for example, log on. Let's talk about IT, for example. So talk about log on, monitor, download, browser, USB. So anyway, this is very similar to collocations, words that flow together. Any slide there left? I think this is it. Yeah. So this actually brings me to the end of the section. Just to wrap up, vocabulary, just like other elements such as grammar, writing, listening, and speaking, vocabulary happens to be the least, let me say, element dealt with at schools. We try just to we are trying to focus on this because we see the potential of that new component in boosting our students' academic achievement, in preparing them for the future, and in just having them ready for the job market eventually. Thank you so much. And now I'll hand the floor to Teresa.
I can hear you talk for hours, Hamada. I always find them so insightful, and I walk away learning something new every time. Hello, parents. Hi, students. Hopefully everyone has had a really good evening so far and hasn't gotten actually wet or anything. I got caught in the rain earlier, so I had to kind of scramble to get ready. So hopefully I don't look too disheveled to you guys. But just kind of to reintroduce myself, my name is Teresa. Most of the students will call me T or Miss T because my name is a little hard to say, and I get that. So Miss T or T is perfectly fine with me. Going into a little bit more of like the technical stuff with Wordly Wise and connecting it to our classes at Linkkey and everything, one of our goals that we've kind of identified as Linkkey teachers is ultimately to help our students grow and very fine-tune their reading, their writing, and ultimately their communication skills. And one strategy to meet this goal is to facilitate both vocabulary learning as well as vocabulary building skills through Wordly Wise. Mind going to the next slide, Matt? Thank you. The beautiful thing about vocabulary, just the word vocabulary itself, is that there's multiple definitions for it, and there's nothing that's no agreeable full definition on it, which is kind of the chaotic beauty of it. But kind of in a more simplified definition, a vocabulary is going to be a type of tool that collects together an assortment of fundamentally unique, useful, and familiar words for a person. Individuals often will use 4 different types of vocabulary. We will have listening vocabulary, reading, speaking, and writing vocabulary. Both of our writing courses, as well as our English literature courses and our standardized testing courses, foster the growth of these types of vocabulary, also in a variety of ways, though, depending on the course that's being taken. And as educators in these courses, we very much understand the immeasurable importance of having a strong understanding and foundation and application of vocabulary. A part of this understanding really stems from our goal for all of our students, not just to have a well-rounded vocabulary, but more specifically, a well-rounded academic vocabulary. Because when we talk about the word vocabulary and academic vocabulary, there's actually a little bit of a difference. The myth when it comes to the term academic vocabulary is that there's only one or two concrete definitions of it that's kind of agreed upon across the entire globe. In reality, there's no one set agreed upon definition, but rather a plethora of them depending on what we're referring to. If we're being more specific with the type of academic vocabulary, Hamana gave us a fantastic example earlier with a type of engineering vocabulary, etc. Two professors tried to take on the task, though, of defining academic vocabulary, and these were the professors J.F. Bowman and M.F. Graves. And they attempted to take this on without necessarily knowing how daunting of a task it was going to be. Ultimately, they were not able to actually identify a concrete definition or one that was at least agreed upon by everyone, but rather they found a plethora of several terms, some of them kind of overlapping in meaning, while others were very entirely different. Some of them just kind of listed here. There's general academic vocabulary. They have general academic words. There's academic background, academic literacy, domain knowledge, academic language skills even, domain-specific vocabulary. The list just kind of continues. But apart from the specifics of like each of these terms and how they overlap, our goal really is to foster, nurture, and ultimately assist the process of developing a robust vocabulary, but also more specifically, a robust academic vocabulary. And one resource that we have all very excitedly kind of agreed upon is WordlyWise 3000 and braiding that in tandem with our course material currently. Can you go to the next slide, Matt? Beautiful, thank you. WordlyWise 3000 has their own term actually for academic vocabulary, and they call this school language. As I quote, school language or school words are the words you find in the books you read, from novels to textbooks and on tests. These words are different from the kinds of words you use when you're hanging out with your friends or talking casually with your family. And that's why often you need to study such words directly. WordlyWise is ultimately designed with academia in mind, and in particular, it really helps to instruct students on terms commonly used in schools, standardized tests, as well as professional environments. The majority of the terms that are used in this are terms that are found within academic vocabularies and academic language. Ultimately, kind of boiling it down, the words that we use have impact, and whether it's within a personal or professional context or a school context, we need to know how to communicate effectively and use a variety of vocabulary types to do so. The vocabulary that will, one of the biggest anyways, have the greatest impact on students' lives is that of an academic vocabulary. And this is one of the big reasons why we chose to braid WordlyWise into our curriculum, as we find the combination of reading, discussing, writing, and critically analyzing works of literature in tandem with separate vocabulary work to be one of the best ways for a student to encounter, learn, understand, and really remember new words that are going to ultimately transform their lexicon forever. The construction of WordlyWise is beautifully engaging, but also really straightforward. So it's kind of easy just to jump in even wherever and kind of go from there. We're also of the belief that because of this straightforward construction, there's a technical brilliance to it, and more specifically in the sense that it's far superior in reaching its targets than any singular vocabulary tool is by itself. More specifically, WordlyWise uses several strategies to simplify and accelerate a student's vocabulary development, and we have highlighted 4 in the next slide over. Thank you, Matt. So there's just 4 of them. I kept going into them and I wanted to talk about all of them, but to be honest, I think there would be too many slides and we'd be here for like an additional hour, and I don't think anyone wants to do that. So just kind of narrowed it down to some of the 4 that also cross over into our standardized testing realm. But starting with the word list, every chapter in WordlyWise begins with a word list. It's a comprehensive breakdown of words and their definitions, and the list itself is actually structured very similarly to a dictionary definition, which makes it very familiar and easy to follow as a result. The list more specifically does a beautiful breakdown of words phonetically, as Hamada's kind of touched on already. The definitions are also very succinct in how they're worded, and they also show how each word can fit into multiple different parts of speech. So how a word could, for example, be both a noun and an adjective depending on the context that it's in. It also gives a lot of sentence examples for them that are very quick, easy reads and very digestible for the student to understand. Word study synonyms is another one of the activities that are in the Wordly Live section. It's not in all of the chapters, but it's throughout many of them. It's an exercise that more specifically targets a student's understanding of synonym words by asking, synonym words by asking them to select synonyms amongst a group of words. Sometimes they'll usually give around 4 or 5 words that students can select from, and sometimes there might be multiple answers. So students won't just have to narrow down one correct answer, but they have to kind of critically think a little bit more and think that is there maybe the possibility of 2 or even 3 answers for some of the questions being asked. Finding meanings is another one. This is an interesting one in construction, I will say that, but it is a type of sentence construction exercise where it takes words from the word list and it asks students to construct a sentence from them using 2 provided sentence fragments. The sentence fragments, though, there's around 4 of them that are given and they have to use 2 for the construction, but they vary very finely. Actually, I realized the construction there. Let me re-explain. They vary in the sense that there might be a word or 2 of difference. So students can't just kind of cut and paste something together so it sounds correct. Rather, they have to think more critically about what the definition of a word is in order to select the best fragments to create a sentence. The last one I'm going to talk about is vocabulary and context. And this one I was especially very excited for as a SACT and SAT teacher, as it's a type of reading comprehension, it's an analysis, as well as a sentence writing exercise. This exercise more specifically requires students to read a passage and answer a series of questions using full sentences. Some of the questions target more specifically the words that are used within the passage, and they have to give context for what the words are. Others require students to kind of reason and inform their answers through critically analyzing and thinking about the text, which is a lot of the critical analysis skills that they will learn in our classes. Ultimately, though, having a verbose vocabulary is an essential skill, and our plan for the 2024 semester and kind of going forward is to use several of these strategies. This is because, as language experts have really found, employing several strategies helps to reinforce a student's knowledge and understanding of words, their meanings, as well as how to integrate these words in different ways and in different contexts, from writing a paper for a school assignment to writing an email to a boss. Do you mind going to the next slide, Matt? Beautiful, thank you. Now, language, just kind of more broadly speaking, is very ubiquitous in the sense that everyone uses it as a basis of communication. Language is really cool in that way. It can be written, it can be spoken, it can be signed, it can be felt, even for the examples of like Braille. There's so many more ways that we can do it. Language can also be colloquial, it can be personal, it can be sacred, regional, etc., etc. And recognizing the meaning and the application of words is essential for comprehension. For example, what an individual reads, hears, and sees, and how they comprehend what they're reading, hearing, and seeing. And this is especially true for students. The more a student stumbles over unfamiliar words or verbiage, the more time they have to take to actually remove themselves from like the reading context, look up these words, understand them, and then go back to the text to reread and understand it with this new context in mind. That can break up a reading and ultimately kind of break up a little bit more of the understanding of a reading or an assignment that a student is doing. Developing different vocabularies then, but especially academic vocabularies in particular, awards students with advantages and successes in the future that they can carry both into their scholarly and their professional lives. And there are many reasons why for this. I have 4 only listed here, but there are many other reasons, many of which also Hamada said earlier. One reason it's really good just to have a well-versed vocabulary is it's a competitive and highly valued skill. The need for people to write and communicate with clarity, precision, and style is always in high demand. And being able to properly and effectively utilize a distinct vocabulary takes time. But it's also one of the best advantages to having in any field, academia or otherwise. A second reason is that the growing a vocabulary develops an individual's grasp of language literacy or their knowledge of language and how it works. The English language is a little weird that it doesn't like to operate like any other languages. It kind of has its own set of rules, but it takes a lot of borrowings from French, Italian, Latin, Greek, Spanish, you name it, there's so many in there. And sometimes they make changes and sometimes they don't. But having language literacy not only helps you to understand these words, but it also helps to determine the ability to successfully communicate. So, for example, a student's ability to use a wide variety of words and sentence structures to convey a specific argument within an essay, for instance. A third reason is that actively expanding our vocabulary really helps to improve a student's ability to read critically and read comprehensively. Having a strong vocabulary means that a student will be able to both construct and comprehend a variety of texts, from books to poems to even just reading texts on like documentaries, for example. And this often boils down to a student's understanding of advanced based words, their ability to make connections between a variety of texts, as well as their understanding of rhetoric. And all of this has footing and a foundation in vocabulary. The final reason we're going to be talking about is that a well-versed vocabulary is a great way to build up, practice, and really enhance the quality of a student's written communication skills. This is especially important in our world today. Words help individuals to articulate their ideas and make coherent, logical connections. Words additionally enhance how interesting and exciting a piece of writing is. I always encourage my students to argue about the things that are weird or fun and use the language that they've been learning throughout the semester, or words that maybe we haven't even talked on and they want to bring into their essay because they know that it makes a killer sentence. I love seeing students be able just to properly use words, or when they don't, for example, we're able to step in and correct them and show them different ways on how to use like this really cool word, for example. Do you mind going to the next slide, Matt? Beautiful, thank you. Now, as mentioned previously, in both Linkey's like writing and English literature streams, our students will be engaging with language through vocabulary building tools like Wordly-Wise, as well as the literature that's packed full of narrative, complexity, symbolic density, subjectivity, and complex artistry even. In building a vocabulary in tandem with learning about reading and writing through English and its famous literatures, a student ultimately strengthens their ability to understand and articulate their own ideas, their own arguments, their own philosophies, their own experiences even, but within a clear and digestible format. Because a student could have the best argument possible, but if they're not able to articulate that argument with their words, it gets lost. What ends up happening then is the student with the not as cool argument, maybe a more basic argument, but an argument that they're able to clearly communicate, they get the higher mark as a result. When we bring standardized testing into play, so the SSAT and the SAT especially, we bring these into the conversation, the first thing that many students are taught, and it's also something that I teach my students here, is that it's incredibly, incredibly important that all of these, or to realize that all of these tests hinge on their overall grasp and application of vocabulary. In consequence, the time that a student puts into learning new words and vocabulary building techniques will pay off later, not just on specific tests or even just within assignments for their school classes, but well into their adult years and beyond. Building a vocabulary takes diligence and time though, and it can be done through multiple avenues. And this is where we're kind of bringing Wordly-Wise into this, but also the reward from this, it far exceeds just a high grade that a student can get on an assignment or on a standardized test. On the next couple slides over, there's going to be a couple quick breakdowns into two standardized tests where vocabulary is going to be incredibly essential. The first one we're going to be looking at is the do you mind going back, Matt? I think I actually forgot to talk about the SSAT first. No, that's my fault. Just going back one slide.
That's what you're looking for.
Beautiful. Yes, thank you so much. So for those of you guys who, and students who are especially here, some of you guys have probably taken the SSAT, so this might be a slightly horrible nightmare for you to remember. So we'll go quick. I apologize on that. But the SSAT stands for the Secondary School Admissions Test, and it's taken by a variety of private schools, more specifically to get into either private schools or private high schools. The test structure is broken down to 4 categories: reading, quantitative, verbal, and a writing portion in particular. The math portion or the quantitative portion doesn't touch too much on vocabulary, save for the specific vocabulary used within a mathematical context. The reading, verbal, and writing sections, though, all touch on a student's ability to use vocabulary. The reading section tests the student's ability to read and understand both short fiction and short nonfiction passages. Students will be required to read a passage and answer a series of questions on this. Some of these will be asking students to identify why an author used a certain word within a sentence or with even a sequence of words. Others will ask more broader questions like what the main argument is, or is there an inference being made by an author? The verbal section will test the students' knowledge of vocabulary using two different types. They will be synonyms and analogies. Synonyms is going to be kind of looking at the most alike words, and analogies is creating the analogous comparisons. These will be not accompanied by any passage or anything, and the students will rather just have the words in front of them, and they will have to dig up their knowledge of the different definitions of these words, the different contexts that they've even heard these words in order to select the correct answer. The writing section is very obvious, but it does test the students' writing abilities. More specifically, it could be a creative piece, it could be a personal essay, or it could be a persuasive essay, only within a very short given time frame. Students are not given the questions or the prompts beforehand, rather they are given them on the test day, and they have to write an essay within 25 minutes, or short story, depending on what they choose. The ability to not only write something within such a short period of time, but in addition, write a piece that is impactful for these adjudicators to read, edges on their ability to use vocabulary, but not just knowing big words, how these words can be used within a variety of sentences, from simple sentences to compound complex sentences even. Going over to the next slide now, we have the Scholastic Aptitude Test, or the SAT. This test is kind of a big boy, and it's more specifically used for US universities. There's a lot of Canadian universities that also use it. Some of the larger ones like U of T, for example. McGill uses it in some of their courses. Not all of them, so you will have to look into the programs depending. And it's also used across a multitude of international universities as well. This test recently went through a very large overhaul. The design of the test was kind of thrown out, and they came out with an entirely new design based on 2 modules. More specifically, though, these are very adaptive modules. What students will receive first is the module 1, or the first test, and they will go through the test as is with the timing. Depending on what their score is on that module, determines the module that they receive as module 2. If a student, for example, scores quite high on module 1, they will therefore get the advanced module 2. If they score lower on module 1, they will get the intermediate level module 2. This, especially with the more advanced modules, module 1 and 2, will be more looked at by the higher schools. So think Harvard, Princeton, NYU, Yale, etc. All of them like to have the most advanced students as possible, and that requires also students to have just an understanding of vocabulary in order to answer a lot of these questions. More specifically, the questions that are going to be hinging on vocabulary will be in the reading and writing section. There used to be a separate reading and a separate writing section, but they have since collapsed them into one over the last year. A big reason and a big part of this was the pandemic that we went through, but also within the increased digitization of our world. Students now can take the test at home, which makes it a lot easier for parents not to have to drive everywhere, go to a testing site. Some tests are still offered like that, but many of them are digital right now. The reading and writing section is divided into 4: standard English conventions, craft and structure, information ideas, and expression of ideas. In particular, all 4 of these sections do touch on a student's ability with vocabulary. It touches on a lot of other things, of course, but more specifically, when we're looking at standard English conventions and craft and structure, these especially test a student's knowledge of vocabulary, as what is given is a short passage ranging from 25 to 250 words, so very, very short, and a single question is given. The students, based on that passage, have to answer that single question regardless of what it's asking. Some of them will ask more standard conventions, things like punctuation, grammar, synonyms, syntax, etc. Others will ask students to look at the main idea of passages, look at how they are arguing a point, maybe look at different DNA sequences within it. It could be also contextual pieces, you name it, it kind of goes on. Ultimately, though, with both these standardized tests, regardless of even if you understand what's being talked about in the passages, you can guaranteed still try to figure out what is going on just through your knowledge of vocabulary alone. When we go into the next slide, and this will be the final slide for you guys tonight, we've taken a look-see and a quick breakdown of these are the same 4 example exercises from Wordly-Wise that were looked at earlier and how they compare to the SSAT and the SAT in particular. A lot of the exercises in Wordly-Wise, if not all of them, are very comparable to questions or even full structures that are seen on these standardized tests. For the word list, for example, although not on the actual test, both the SSAT and SAT adjudicators highly recommend students create vocabulary and word lists by themselves. They recommend this as one of the very first things that are seen in any SAT or SSAT textbook or any class that's given in, because they are hinging on the idea that once you begin to build a foundation of words, you will be able to answer questions even if you don't understand the full context of them. Word study synonyms. In particular, it has very big similarities to the SSAT, as you guys heard earlier with their synonyms section. This very much mirrors it in construction, the only difference being that on the actual SSAT itself, you don't have the option of choosing multiple answers. There's instead only one correct answer, but it is the answer that is the closest related. For example, some really nasty questions on the SSAT will throw on maybe 2 or 3 synonyms that all work actually, but the student needs to figure out in particular which one will fit the best context for the word given. On the SAT, there's no specific synonyms questions that are asked, but there are going to be questions that engage students to look at specific types of vocabulary that are used within the given passages and figure out from the answer options given which word could fit into the context or fit into the passage, without changing the meaning of it or what it's trying to communicate. Finding meaning, on this end, it is similar to the SSAT in some senses, but in others, there is no specific kind of breakdown or construction of it on the actual exam. On the SAT, though, there is. More specifically, when I was looking at the finding meanings, it actually reminded me of 2 questions on the newest exam. The questions being both expression of ideas questions, and they're reading as follows. Quote, which choice completes the text with the most logical and precise word or phrase, and which choice completes the text with the most logical transition? Both of these sound very similar, but they are asking very different questions. Here, the first one is asking for the most logical and precise word or phrase, meaning that students will have to go through the word list that is given to them and figure out which word will be the best to use within the given passage to communicate the idea or thought. For the most logical transition, this is more engaging not only vocabulary, but also students' understanding of sentence constructions, how there's going to be a transition between maybe certain types of punctuation. Does a word or the transition begin a sentence? Is it like after a semicolon, for example, etc.? Vocabulary and context. Both exams touch on this more specifically. A lot of the questions on the SAT will ask this just kind of in a variety of ways with some of the different questions from the standard English conventions and expression of ideas questions. And on the SSAT in particular, you will not have to answer full sentences. Rather, there will just be a multiple choice question that students will have to gauge at. And this will be especially within the reading section of the exam. Ultimately, and just kind of boiling it down, though, after a lot of the technical talk through these, learning vocabulary is essential for any student, anyone really. Building a vocabulary is essential for a well-rounded student, more specifically also because over the course of our professional and academic careers, words become important. And how you market yourself as an individual sometimes just hinges on how you are able to write and articulate about yourself. And that's one of our big goals here at Linkey, is being able for students to not just understand words, but also be able to confidently use them outside even the classroom. We want them to, of course, use them in the classroom and on standardized tests, but how can they use them within their everyday lives when they're writing an email, writing a text message, even talking to you guys as parents? That's it for me, you guys. Thank you so much for listening to the technical jargon on my end, and I'm going to be passing it back to Matt at this time.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Thank you to both
Okay.
Teresa and to Hamada for some wonderful presentations. Yeah, there's a lot of things to think about with with what Teresa was talking about there at the end. There were a few things I wanted to highlight. One of them you were sort of mentioning the PTSD from standardized tests, and as you started talking about the formulation of some of those SAT questions, the choose the most correct answer, then they give you 4 incorrect answers and you sit there and try to decide which one is the least wrong. There's a lot of real difficulty with these standardized tests. And then in particular talking about both of you were highlighting this, the value of English and having a strong vocabulary beyond just school. And as they both pointed out so well throughout this presentation, improving your English skills does not just help you in English class, though it will obviously help you in English class, but every single class that involves submitting reports are going to be important. Eventually, you're going to apply for university. There are personal answers. There are personal essays. Beyond that, I use my vocabulary and my grammar skills and my English skills every single day. This is important as a teacher. This is important as a manager. This is important as a coworker. If I need somebody to cover my class and I word my email poorly, that might be the difference between them doing a little bit of self-sacrifice and helping me out, or them just not responding to the email because it sounds rude or presumptive. Being a strong communicator is a very, very important skill to develop. I can't think of anybody who's ever thought I've wasted my time mastering the language that I and the people around me speak. Okay, we have 2 questions in chat, and I'd also like to take this time to invite everybody still watching to go ahead and either type their question down there or use the hand raise tool if you would like to ask your question verbally. We'll of course be okay with that as well. But we'll go through those 2 questions. And then I have 1 or 2 questions that I jotted down that I wouldn't mind hearing Teresa and Hamada give us answers to. And then after that, we'll get everybody off and home. We're at 7:55, so we're doing pretty well. Our estimated end time's probably about 8:15 right now, maybe 8:10. We'll see how it goes. First question that came in was about, do students need to bring laptops or iPads to class? And I was going to answer this, and then I realized it's kind of different depending on the teacher. So we'll hear from Hamada first on this. What are your feelings about devices in class? Are they useful? Are they required?
Thank you, Matt. It's a very good question. Thank you for raising that point, actually. I think having a computer in class would be helpful when we have to engage the process of searching for some words or synonyms or antonyms or things like that. So occasionally I ask my students to access a website, for example, titled Thesaurus, where they have to look for a word. For example, talking about a job, they can come up with the word profession or career, and then we can make the choice which word we should use in a specific context. Is it a must to have an iPad or a computer? Not really, but occasionally I do ask my students, like next class, for example, we need a computer because we're going to conduct research because we are in the process of preparing for a paragraph, for example. So I think it's going to be something required by us teachers.
Exactly, yes. Yeah. So actually for Linky, the forbidden use the iPad or iPhone or laptop during the class. But in the break time, sure, the student able to use the iPad, iPhone, or phone or laptops. Yeah.
So just for pedagogical purposes, right? Just for learning. Thanks.
Right.
Of course. And this is why I wanted to actually bring it to both of you before I just said, like, I ban them in my classroom. Because different teachers have different relationship with this tech. Hamada's class is also, I don't know what you do, but your kids work really hard in your class, Hamada.
Yeah.
You always get very, very good buy-in from them. So this is a thing that's very important. And ultimately, as a parent, it's going to be up to you to make a call. I do have some sympathy for the fact that it's easier for you to tell your kids no to computer if I also tell them no to a computer. So we absolutely want to be working with you on this stuff. But just through communication with parents, some kids can handle having a computer at a very young age and others can't. I have friends who are adults, who are lawyers, who still find it impossible to not, message me links to Reddit and send me memes and stuff during the day when I'm sitting here like, shouldn't you be trying to keep, whatever horrible company you work for from having to pay large amounts of money to the innocent people that they've harmed? But, it's hard for some adults. So we don't think it's fair for kids to have to grapple with having access to everything all of the time. Teresa, do you have thoughts on this?
I do, yes. I do allow laptops and iPads in class, very much depending though on like what's being done in lecture. I always encourage my students to kind of write like hand notes and everything, but sometimes, especially with some of my older lectures, so like my grade 10s, 11s, and 12s, if we're doing a very dense lecture, I will encourage them to take notes. And if it's easier for them to take notes like very quickly using just like a typing software, I very much encourage that, as sometimes accessibility needs are there. I know I was a student that would use a laptop in class, but because I could look at a teacher and just kind of type as I was listening to them. Not all the time though, especially when there's just kind of a lecture going on. And if it's just kind of no notes are really required, then I will ask students to shut down their laptops for now, and then they can bring them out on a break time. Some assignments will be kind of electronically handed in just because it's easier for like marking purposes, as well as it saves on paper and from you guys having to print off assignments. In that case, laptops and everything will be used and encouraged. But if a student doesn't bring a laptop or an iPad to class, they are not at a disadvantage in any case of means. Rather, we just encourage them to bring something to take notes with. So a simple notebook and a pen and paper work just as beautifully as a laptop. So I am for them, but obviously within certain means. And I very much always warn my students that if I do give you like the ability and the accessibility to use these laptops, I expect you guys to just kind of use them for learning purposes. And if I catch them either listening to something with a hidden earbud in their ear, or kind of catch them on like Reddit, for example, then I will ask them to kind of close their laptop, to not use it for the rest of class, and to not bring it in the next class then, because they ultimately took advantage of the privilege that we gave them at that time. So ultimately, yes, but for academic purposes only.
Yeah, I agree with that. This question, I'm very interested to hear both of your responses to. How to select a word. So I'll read it to you verbatim, and then we'll kind of unpack this. How to select a word among group of words. Does it matter if I pick a different word from your choice? So let's just jump back ahead in the presentation, because this came from something Hamada had said. We were on sort of the hyponyms category. We had a couple of different categories here. So the way I want to direct this question, and we can start with Hamada again, because it is coming off of his slide. When a student is selecting a word, and we have several words that we can all agree sort of mean the same thing, what's that like for you as a teacher when there's a particular word that ought to be used in this situation, and the student has used a word that is close to it?
Thank you for the question. Thank you for indicating this slide there that has the most relevance, to the point. Actually, I try to adopt something when I teach vocabulary and when I teach English generally. I try to have a class plan arranged as follows. Like I try to share something called I call language knowledge, which is the information I want to share with my students, whether it is grammar or vocabulary or anything to do with the English language, really. Beyond that, I start walking them, taking them by hand in terms of some controlled performance activities. So I try to assess how much of that knowledge they have acquired, actually, by getting them to exercise individually what they have learned. Beyond that, I try to have something I call authentic performance, where they have to work on their own, deploying showing the information they actually got from me, and then they practiced individually. Maybe I can have them in team-based activities as well. But when it comes to actually to that specific question, like which word, I always try to, let me say, to give some information about, to share knowledge about, and if the student is very close to the meaning but did not get the correct answer, I try to show the difference between what they, let me say, supplied as an answer and the actual correct answer. So I make sure that difference is abundantly clear for the students.
Yes. So Matt, so can I take some quick additional note at this page?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I change to Chinese version. 哎，大家好哈，这个是因为刚才感谢三位老师的分享，然后因为看到这个配置的话，我想有一些事情可以跟大家分享一下，就是我想让大家知道，就是为什么 Linky，其实咱们英语课啊已经开了很多的这个很多年了，也每个学期都有固定的这种英文的课程，不管是Grade 4 to Grade 12的 English Literature，还是这个 Writing 的这个5 to 6的 Creative Writing，还是7 to 8、9 to 10的这个 Writing 的课。包括11年级到12年级这种 persuasive writing 的课。为什么这次从今年开始，我们会引入这个 What Did Wise 3000这本书来大量的去强化孩子们词汇的能力？其实很多年哈，断断续续的，包括今年的这个秋季的时候，也有很多的家长在问我们说，你们有没有帮助孩子提升词汇的部分啊？其实刚才包括Teresa 老师也分享了，因为 Teresa 呢和 Matt 老师都有教授 SSAT 和 SAT 这种标准化考试的经验。说刚才呢，这个 Teresa 老师和 Matt 老师也分享了这个 Wordly Wise 3000和 Standard Test SAT、SSAT 的这种区别。大家其实可以看到哈，标准化考试更多的还是提升或者考验孩子在你文字的理解或者整篇文章对于文章的理解。而在这之前，怎么能够让孩子去理解这个文章，理解这个词对不对？那么这个时候，那怎么去完成这样的功效，去正确理解一个词？在我们的这种研究过程中发现，其实 Wordly Wise 能够有很好的帮助孩子们去完成这一步的工作。其实随着这个三位老师的分享的时候，我也查看了一下 Wordly Wise 这些教材的这个书哈，其实可以给大家分享几页，比如说它的这个结构。Excuse me, Mike, could you go back to the Wordly Wise system? I remember you have the slide for the word list or
Yeah, let me
all of
take a
the
look.
system of Wordly Wise.
System Wordly
Okay.
Wise. Was
Yeah.
this? Did it have a nice little chart?
I think the slide's name is, for example, strategy from Wordly Wise 3000.
Got it.
Yeah. 大家可以看到哈，这 Wordly Wise 每一个 unit 都是先是由几个单词来进行的啊。那这几个单词过程中，并不是说单纯的告诉孩子意思，当然第一步是这样的。那第二步的话，他会问到孩子说：“你在这个你知道这个意思，那接下来的这种 meaning 里面，哪一个是正确的？正确的你选择，不正确的你就不选择。”那么的话，其实就是一步一步的在帮助孩子去正确的理解这个词。那包括后面还有一个用法，说你怎么在这个句子中去使用这个词，然后再加上到后来你对这个词的3种解释，你能不能选择出正确的？然后最后是进入到文章了啊，每一个 unit 有很多，大概10几个词，它能够融汇在一篇文章里面，让大家去通过上下文去正确理解。最后还是要去考察孩子在这个 passage 里面这个词用的是正确与否。大家可以看到哈，即使是阅读理解，同样的阅读理解，但是在 Wordly Wise 这种词汇的书里面，它更多 focus 在是你这个词汇的理解，而 Standard Test 是考验你对于整篇文章它给你一个问题的对与错。所以说这两个是有非常大的区别的。所以说我们也希望通过这样的刻意的练习，就为什么说刻意练习？有时咱们说中文里面哈，咱们为什么没有一个类似于这样的一个教材去来提升我们对于中文词汇的这种应用？那是因为不管是英文的这种文法，就是拼音结构自然拼读，还是中文的拼音和汉字是完全不一样。那也可能是因为汉字的这种不同的这种叫做你的读音和你的书写的不同。那么在从小1年级到这个高中毕业的这个整个过程中，我们大量的已经在校内完成了这个词汇的强化练习。但是对于本地孩子来说，从最小的自然拼读不用这种音标去告诉你这些单词怎么能读出来， 啊，那你读出来就够了，你会拼了，那你就会认识这个词了，然后在生活中去用。但是用呢，又没有在学校中，大部分学校哈，没有像这种刻意练习去让你理解每一个词。那么在未来，不管是你的这种high school 的 IC 的 writing，或者是你最后的这个 University of Vacation 的 IC 方面，你会发现你的词穷，就是我想知道写这个词，但是我不会用，或是我的大脑没有这些部分去调用出来。那这个时候其实就说明你在小时候的刻意练习没有达到一定的强度。所以说，那这里面要说明我们的所有的 English 和 Writing 课程 What Advice 只是辅助教材，因为在这个基础上，更多的还是要能够让孩子去扩充他们的知识，与此同时再加入这个的刻意练习。所以有时候家长在问到看到我们的这个讲座的信息之后，说，哎，你们哪个课是 What Advice 3000的课？对不起，我没有 only focus on the What Advice 3000 course，它只是一部分课程的一部分，包括在课下的练习 homework 都会涉及到这些。好，Thank you, Matt.
Thank you very much, Shen.
Yeah, you can go back to Q&A.
Okay. So we're going to follow up in just a moment on this earlier question about choosing the wrong word. And so I'm going to say something about it for a moment or two, and then I have a follow-up question that I'd like to see if Teresa has anything for. So when you ask, what if you choose the wrong word, as in a word different from the one that I have chosen or the one that I would like you to use? I think what that suggests is a belief that in the English language, we just have like 10 words that all mean one thing. Run, jog, sprint, trot, hike. They all basically mean the same thing, but they all have subtle differences. This is the same in all applications of English grammar. There is always a more appropriate version until you find the perfect word. And there are a lot of extraordinarily specific words in English, some of which we kind of don't use. They're sort of dead words that are for nerds. And then there's some words that are really, really good at explaining something. And so where you run into mistakes most commonly with grammar, I have found, especially basically grade 8 up, people start to make this issue, is where they try to take a basic word and upgrade it using their thesaurus to try to find something more specific. And they choose a word that is a higher level word, but it specifically means something different than what they are trying to say. So if you said the two men jogged as fast as they could towards the burning building, you wouldn't have correctly captured the specific meaning you were looking for. You wanted ran or sprinted. Jog and sprinted are both more specific than ran, are perhaps more complicated than ran, but one of them moves you in the correct direction, closer to the meaning you wanted to make, and the other moves you farther away. Teresa, I was wondering if, in the spirit of what I just said, you can think of any examples of a student going for a move like this, applying some nice high-level vocabulary, reaching for the sky and coming down with something completely different than what they had intended.
I do happen to be a word nerd, so this falls exactly into my category. I do actually have a really good example. This was a grade 11, grade 12 student of mine who we're going to be keeping anonymous, of course, but I'm actually going to write the words in the chat because these words are a little complicated. Some of them, though, or at least one of them, should be very familiar to everyone. So we have the words therefore, succinct, and laconic. I believe both Dr. Hamada and Matt have heard me talk about this before, but in these three words, they fit into a similar category in the sense where they are meaning to summarize something. When we are using the word therefore, oftentimes we are just kind of collecting together everything that was said within a paragraph or within a presentation or whatnot, and trying to sum it up within like a couple sentences. If we go to dictionary.com or like a thesaurus, or even like the dictionary.com's kind of sister website of like synonyms and antonyms, if you type in the word therefore, you will come up with a big list of multiple words that could substitute for therefore. But what this list doesn't communicate is that these words, and as Matt kind of hinted at already, these words just can't be placed and swapped in for one another because it ultimately changes the content and the context of a sentence. So in the example I just gave, therefore, I had a student use the word succinct at first. To be succinct means to summarize, yes, but it means to summarize within maybe one sentence or maybe like 7 to 10 words at that. It's not as great or as large as therefore or summarizing something with therefore. I went back with this student, just kind of circled that, being like, maybe choose a different word. I could kind of see why they were trying to avoid the word therefore. It didn't really fit within the sentence. And they came back with the word laconic. Laconic also means to kind of summarize something, but it means to summarize something within 2 or 3 words. So when someone says laconically speaking, and then they come with a very large explanation after that, doesn't mean that at all. And it actually kind of confuses the reader because in this, you are trying to use a larger word or a more verbose word in that to kind of sound smarter. But in reality, you're communicating that you just kind of chose a word because it sounded cool and means the same thing almost as what you want to talk about. This is a really common thing that happens, you guys. It happens, I've seen it within my grade 5-6 students, and I've seen it within my grade 12 SAT students even. Ultimately, words are, especially within English, they do have very specific meanings to them. And a lot of them cannot be swapped out for one or the other just because it might sound a little bit different or cooler within the context given. So yes, I've come across this many a times. I will never forget this example because those words are, if we look it up online, they all mean therefore, but they're very far from what they actually mean from one another. So that is my beautiful example there. Thank you, Matt, for actually asking me that. I kind of love sharing that one if I'm being honest. So I appreciate that.
Yes, thank you very much, Teresa. Mine, I'll be a little bit short here. A student tried to tell me that they had grown up with an idea or having an idea or having an idea like deep in their head or implanted in their head, and the word they chose was impregnated, which was a rather stunning thing to read in the paragraph. I grew up impregnated with the belief I was bad at grammar. Oh, interesting. Oh, wonderful. All right, so we have 2 more questions to get through. We'll try to go quickly through these. We've got, excuse me. So what I'd like to talk about is the homework question. Okay, except the classes, would the teacher give some home reading books for homework? We'll start with Teresa and then go over to Hamana on this. Are your kids expected to read outside of the classroom?
Depends on actually the class that we're talking about. So within my standardized testing classes, I always, both for SSAT and SAT, I require students to get at least one book, and it has to be a new book in particular. I provide 2 different reading lists for them, one for each test, of course, that are applicable and that have enough like challenging vocabulary to prepare for the exam. These are often going to be kind of the books that you find on like 100 books to read before you die lists. Some of them also are books that I've just read personally and have found that they have like fantastic vocabulary or really great stories for students to get on board with. And in the standardized testing classes more specifically, with their reading, they always have to create a definitions list. And together they create a very large definitions list that at the end of the semester, they walk away with hundreds of new words. They have to have the word, they need to highlight where the word came in the book, they need to create a definition for the word within their own terms, or rather within their own wording, then they have to create a sentence using that word there, and everything is kind of checked over by me going throughout the weeks. For the writing classes, there is going to be some reading assigned. More specifically though, there's going to be short stories assigned for that and some poetry, depending on what we're going to be doing in the week. And for the English literature courses, I always assign at least 1 novel, sometimes 2, depending on how long the novels are, how much they cross over. In that, I will sometimes give additional readings. Sometimes I will give like a sister essay with a book, or sometimes I like to give students either preludes or essays that have been written by other authors about the work that they are reading. Oftentimes they will then have to kind of read that and bring their kind of notes and everything that they took to class to talk about throughout the lecture there. So kind
How
of
much
depending on
homework
like
do
the
you try
course.
to? Sorry.
No,
How much
no, go
homework
right
do you
ahead.
try to give a week?
Ooh, that depends. I will usually assign, at least for all my classes, there's going to be some reading homework. There will be a vocabulary homework at least. I'm going to hopefully assign probably minimum 2 pieces of vocabulary homework a week. That's like my goal. If we can get more in, that's obviously always wanted. That can also fluctuate depending on if a student, if they, for example, are experiencing some difficulties with like the vocabulary homework that is assigned. Wordly-Wise actually is really flexible in that case, where like we can kind of go down or up a level. For example, if a student is finding the homework to be too easy, we can easily bump them up a grade or 2 in the Wordly-Wise category and assign it there. I also like to possibly, or when possible, sorry, assign like a writing piece of homework. Often I will do that like every other week, depending, so that way students will also have time to write in class, because in my classes, I also like to implement a lot of writing exercises there, or exercises where they're working together with their peers to answer questions, or we will go through the answers as a class and I'll have time to check over the work in class as well.
Thank you, Teresa. I'm going to try to move us along a little bit and then give you both one more final question where you can give us your full long answers, and then we'll get everybody home. To finish
just a
off
quick note.
this question, thank you.
Excuse me,
What's
Matt.
that,
Just a
Chan?
quick note. Yeah, just a quick
Yeah, go
note.
ahead.
Yes. Yeah. So 家长问到了互作业的问题哈。这个首先呢，咱们所有的英文课和 writing 课都是要有作业的，而且刚才呢，Teresa 老师也解释了咱们课上的这个structure 啊。咱们的the literature reading 的课 writing lecture reading 的课程哈，咱们是有一本主要的读物。那么的话，每个学期读一本书，相对来讲还是有点 boring 哈。所以说，我们的 Matt 老师包括 Teresa 老师会有一些这种 short story 的东西给到课上啊，来去充实整个课的部分，包括这个 poetry 的这个 analysis 等等。那 writing 课程我们是也有统一的读物的啊，因为你只有能统一的阅读，然后统一的去 writing，才能暴露出你的问题，然后我们的 Dr. Haman 的话才会有你的这个看你的 homework， check your homework and summarize your problem in the homework。and 在课上会给你改啊，会给你大家去一起去批改去说啊，所以说我们的课程是有作业的，而且 highly recommend students finish their homework after the class 啊，说3遍啊，一定是强烈推荐孩子们要完成 homework，才能有效的帮助他们去提升英语，好吧？Thank you, Matt.
Thank you very much, Shen. Yeah, just to conclude on this, typically you will have reading outside of the classroom. Oftentimes you will have books you need to pick up on your own. We try to keep these books as inexpensive as we can. But other times we'll be able to just give you documents or post something on the classroom for you to be able to take. If you ever feel that your student doesn't have enough reading, if you ever feel like you want more homework, just ask us. We will give you a reading list. We have a whole bunch of books, as Teresa was saying, that we absolutely love, that are fantastic for young people to read. And if you want more writing, you can start writing responses to these, and we will tell you how you did. So we are very student focused here. We have small class sizes. I don't think any of these English classes are going to have 12 kids would be a big English class, I think, this semester. I've seen a few with 8. So we're looking at classrooms with small classrooms, but not very many students in them. And so if we need to take another 5 or 10 minutes aside to read your kids' reading response to the advanced book that they are reading, we have the ability to do that. We had another question in here. Yes,
sorry, Matt. Another thing, so for the next semester, Hamanda restore in-person writing course. Yeah, that's important. Yeah. Student able to bring your IC in school to Hamanda. Hamanda will help you to, edit your IC.
Yep.
Yeah.
My pleasure, yeah. Can I say something there, Matt, as well?
Of course.
Thank you for adding that significant point concerning how we can provide some recommendations concerning reading. Like I happen to enjoy the literary genre of short stories a lot. I teach a lot of short stories. I've built a body of short stories up to something like 25 or 30 world-renowned short stories. I've had numerous cases of students like asking me or reflecting on the beauty of a specific short stories and asking me for recommendations. And I got some feedback from them. Like we went on to work on the book. For example, they said we loved Ray Bradbury's short story. Do you have any recommendation, any other work by him? I suggested, for example, Fahrenheit 451, which is considered to be one of the best STEM books in English language. And they told me we went to school, we work on this on our ISP, Independent Study Project. My teacher loved it, and I got, for example, a 90 on that one. It's just because they got the passion from the class. So we can certainly do that. We have one significant strong point at Linky, which is our classes are small. There is a wonderful opportunity for everybody to speak. The atmosphere is very pleasant, and it's a great environment to thrive.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Hamada.
Perfect.
Daisy asks, for grade 5 students, which level should be as beginning of Wordly Wise? For my assessment, that is Wordly Wise level 5. Hamada, Teresa, does that sound correct? Yeah, they seem to match with grade level. If your student tries Wordly Wise level 5 and finds it boring, then you can absolutely move up to level 6. If they find it too hard, you can move down to level 4. That's part of what I like so much about this system, is that it's entirely self-reliant, and also you can kind of narrow in on specific skills. So if your student were trying out this, and we're going to do this in the classroom as well, if one of our students is working through a section and it's extremely easy to them, we're just going to give them next year's sections. And because of the way Google Classroom works, and as Hamada just mentioned, the small classroom sizes, it's really easy to do this. In particular, we can do this covertly. If a student is struggling, we don't have to embarrass them in front of the whole class by handing them, the coloring book. Here's the little kid homework for you. We can just assign it slightly different on the classroom until they're able to catch up with everybody else. But yes, for the most part, we recommend grade 5 start at grade 5. We also had a question in here about, do students need to undergo an entrance test? Shen actually knows probably a little bit more than I do at this exact moment, the current state of entrance tests for English. We have done entrance tests before. They are always placement tests. They're not required for you to get into the class. But if, for example, you think very strongly that your grade 5 student should not be in a grade 5 class, first of all, I'm going to disagree with you, because I think that students should be kept with students who are their same age. And by and large, we assign content based on maturity level. So even if your kid is writing at the level of a grade 7, they're not a grade 7. And the material we assign to them may be too mature for them. That harms the way we have to teach it in the classroom, because we have to use, like little kid words to explain it. And it also might be upsetting to your student in a way that we don't want. So even if you're writing ahead of a grade level, we would still prefer you to be with your age. If you are really adamant, we give you the placement test so that you can show us your receipts and you can show us how smart your kid is. And, then we'll handle it. We'll work on it together, and we'll figure out a good spot, a good education solution that works for you and your student. So is it necessary for an entrance test? Not for us. There are some schools that require entrance tests. We're not one of them. You can take them if you want. Finally, last question that I would like to address, because I think this is a great question, and I'm going to give this to Hamada and Teresa. We'll have Hamada go first. Teresa will go, and then I think we'll be done for the night. How will students, sorry, I've screwed it up already. How will teachers inspire students' enthusiasm and motivation for reading? We're all fighting this battle. We're all finding, how can we get our kids to read? And frankly, if your kids are reading and they're in grade 6 or grade 7, you're already doing an amazing job as a parent. But let's hear from Hamada. Hamada, how do you inspire your students to read?
Thank you. That's a very interesting question, actually. It all starts in our classrooms, I think. I try my absolute best to teach something within my area of expertise, which is literature. I try to teach my students the art of literary analysis, how to write a literary analysis of a passage, specific passage. I indicate the components that should go into that paragraph the students are expected to produce, reflecting on a specific passage I choose, for example, from a play or a novel. So they have to mention something to do with the speaker, with the context, with the literary devices, themes, characters, everything. It naturally goes from there. I could see students just, generalizing the skills working on other short stories, working on some works I teach, like from Shakespeare or Mark Twain, another area of expertise I have from US literature. And I try just to suggest similar readings, same level, of course, and you know, that constant focus there sparks some kind of interest and passion for my students. It always starts with the art of literary analysis, which boosts analytical skills and critical thinking. So yeah.
Yeah，补充一下啊，excuse me, Matt. Yeah, additional notes for parents. Yeah，刚才家长有问哈，怎么能 keep the student enthusiasm？看看3位老师的感觉哈，咱们在 seminar 中的这种激情和热情，你就能感受到怎么能够去 keep 孩子的这种热情，在课上的热情了啊。OK，thanks, Matt.
Teresa, go ahead.
Thank you. Kind of dovetailing from Hamada, completely in agreement. It ultimately kind of starts with like literary analysis, but how we can analyze literature is kind of endless, to be honest. I have taught lectures where we are analyzing different characters and how a character has, for example, characters in Shakespeare, how they were viewed within the early modern era to how we now view them in like the 21st century era with like new perspectives, new philosophies or ideas that are being brought in, and how we can kind of transform these characters to be better, or how we can transform them to have better narratives for themselves when they didn't in the original context, for example. Other times it's just I like to engage students just kind of more personally and see where, like, what other types of literature have they read before. Oftentimes I love to recommend books because I usually have about 3 to 5 books on the go. My goal right now is I've like passed my 6K book reading, and I'm hopefully trying to get to like 650. That is like the new goal anyways. It's a longer goal, but I love taking from that reading list just anything that like a student might find any interest in. And I also encourage students that like any type of reading can help to not only just build vocabulary, but just for them to find something interesting. Reading can be seen in short stories. I'm in the camp with Hamada where I adore short stories. Some of like the best short stories are made up of like 100 words, yet they communicate a lifetime of messages. And it's so profoundly beautiful how they can do that with such few words. Others are, for example, poetry readings that I've like brought students, or I've brought them poetry collections to look into if they're really into the art of writing or creative writing. I have recommended novels to my students depending on some interest or like things that they've brought up in class. It could be even anything from like comic books. Even comic books are kind of looked down on at times as not being a form of literature, when in reality they are. They have to communicate a story, not just with a pictorial representation, but with a few short words, also within just oftentimes speech bubbles. They have to communicate a story. So how are they able to do that with fewer words, but also with pictures as a component? There's a lot of different ways that reading can be inspired. And I'm of the belief that there is a book out there for everyone. You don't have to love reading. You don't have to read every single type of book out there. You are allowed to hate books even. I tell my students all the time, I don't like Romeo and Juliet. I hate that play. I'll never teach that play. I don't like it at all. I love teaching Macbeth and Hamlet though. Those are the great plays to teach, and they teach a lot more than I find anyways, Romeo and Juliet. So I encourage students to know that it's okay for them to not even like a piece of literature, but artfully tell me why they don't like it. Don't just say, I don't like it because the characters aren't cool. Okay, well, why are the characters not cool? What is it about them that you don't like? Do they remind you about someone in your life? Is it a personality quirk, or is it the way that the author wrote a character that you think didn't do them justice, for example? There's a lot of answers kind of to this question that we could really continuously kind of talk about, because we're all big book nerds here. So we could all really just continue talking about it. But ultimately, there is something out there for everyone. And a big goal, like for all of us teachers, is to help students find that book that they like, or at least find a story that they enjoy. And if they don't, even in the end, figure out then how they can still write about things that they might necessarily not like or even hate at times. You can do it. Just do it with your words and do it with your arguments and convince me why I shouldn't like something. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Yeah, I really want to highlight what she said at the end there, that if I don't like a book, I'm not going to teach that book. At Link Key, our teachers have tremendous control over their curriculum. It's why I've enjoyed working here as much as I have. Passion for reading in your students reflects from the passion that the teachers are bringing to the classroom. I'm teaching material that I love, and I'm bringing them in. I'm bringing them with me on that journey. Kids can tell when you're faking it. Kids can tell when you don't like the thing that you're teaching. They can tell that, you know what? You're making a face when you're eating that cold broccoli. I don't think I want to eat that broccoli. I don't think it's actually delicious. If you love what you're eating, if you love what you're making, if you love what you're reading, you're able to transfer that onto the students. And I think that's one of our biggest tools that we have here, is that our teachers care about what they teach. They get control over what they teach. If you're not enjoying your curriculum, that is entirely on you, because I didn't tell you what you had to teach. You got to choose what you got to teach. Okay, that's everything for me tonight, I think, unless Shen's got anything to add.
Nothing for me.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your week, coming here on a Friday evening to hear about what we're cooking up. We're very excited about what we've got coming for the next semester, and we hope to see you all back here in February. It's been wonderful to see you all out here.
Mhm.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
so much.
No,
Thank
thank
you,
you guys
everyone.
so much.
Have a nice weekend.
Yeah, have a good night.
Have a beautiful night, everyone.